The Passion of Jesus from the Gospel of Mark. It was 2 days before the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread, and the high priests and legal experts were seeking how to arrest Jesus by deceit in order to put him to death. Because they were saying, now, not during the festival, or there'll be a riot of the people. And Jesus was reclining to eat in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. And a woman came bearing an alabaster flask of pure nard ointment, luxurious. And breaking open the alabaster flask, she began to anoint the head of Jesus. Some of those standing there were angry and said, "Why has she wasted this? Why, this ointment could have been sold for 300 days' wages and the money given to the poor." And they were harsh with her. But Jesus said, "Let her be. Why are you troubling her? It's a good work that she has worked for me. Look, if you're my followers, the poor you'll always have with you, and you can do good for them whenever you want. But you won't always have me. She has done what she could do. She's anointed my body ahead of time for burial. I tell you, this is the way it is. Wherever the good news is proclaimed in all the world, what she has been done will be told in remembrance of her." And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went over to the high priests and legal experts and promised to hand Jesus over to them. They told him they would give him silver as they rejoiced. And he began looking for an opportune time to hand Jesus over to them. Now on the first day of the Festival of Unleavened Bread, when it was customary to slaughter the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples came to him and said, "Where do you want us to go and prepare the Passover meal for you?" And he sent 2 of them into the city, and those 2 disciples, he gave these instructions. "Go into the city, and you'll see a man bearing a jar of water. Follow him, and where he enters, say to the master of the house, 'The teacher says, where's the guest room where I'm to eat the Passover meal with my disciples? He'll show you a large room ready and furnished. Prepare for us there.' So they went into the city, and they found everything just as he had said, and they prepared the Passover meal. When evening came, Jesus comes with his disciples. And while they're reclining to eat, Jesus says to them, 'One of you will hand me over. One eating with me.' They all became sad and began to say one by one, 'Well, surely not I.' And he said, 'One of the 12, one dipping bread with me in the same bowl. The human one goes just as it's written of him, but how awful for the one by whom the human one is handed over. Better for him if he'd never been born.' And while they were eating, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them and said, 'Take it. This is my body.' And taking the cup, he said to them, 'This is the covenant in my blood about to be poured out for many. I tell you, this is the way it is. I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine till I drink it anew in the empire that God brings.' And after singing a hymn, they went off to the Mount of Olives. Jesus said to them, "You will all stumble, just as it was written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But afterwards I'll go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even if everyone else stumbles, at least I won't." Jesus said to him, "I tell you, this is the way it is. Tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you will renounce me 3 times. He began saying wildly, "Well, even if it's necessary for me to die with you, I definitely won't renounce you." And they were all saying the same thing. And they went to the place named Gethsemane. And he told the disciples to sit and wait. And he took with him Peter and James and John. And they went with him, and he began to feel panicked and anguished. And he said, "My life is profoundly sad, to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch." And going a little further, he fell to the ground and began to pray that if it were possible, this hour might pass from him. And he was saying, "Abba, Father, take this cup from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." And returning, he found the disciples sleeping. And he said, "Simon, weren't you able to stay awake a single hour? All of you, stay awake and pray that you don't come to a testing. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." And going off a second time, he prayed again, the same prayer. And coming back again, he found them sleeping. They didn't know what to say because their eyes were heavy. And going off a third time, he came back. And he said, "Are you going to sleep through and keep resting? I get it. The hour has come. Look, the one handing me over has arrived. Rise. The hour has come for the human one to be handed over into the hands of sinners." And Judas Iscariot came, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the legal experts and the high priests. Now, the one who was handing him over had given them a sign saying, "The one I kissed, that's him. Seize him and take him away under security." And he came to Jesus and he kissed him and said, "Rabboni." And they seized Jesus, and one of those standing by took out a sword, struck at the slave of the high priest, and cut off a little piece of his ear. And responding, Jesus said, "Have you come out against me as against a terrorist? Every day I was among you in the temple teaching, you didn't seize me, so that the scriptures might be fulfilled." And the disciples fled, and they left him. Now there was a young lad wearing nothing but a linen cloth over his naked body, and they seized him, and leaving the cloth behind, he fled naked. And early the next morning, they took Jesus to the headquarters of the high priests, and the legal experts and the elders and the whole council assembled. And Peter followed him into the inner courtyard of the high priest from a distance and was warming himself by the firelight. Now the high priest, the legal experts, and the elders were seeking testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death. But they weren't finding any, because many were testifying falsely, but their testimony didn't agree. Some were testifying, saying, I myself heard him say, I will tear down this temple made with stones, and in 3 days build another not made with stones. But even on this point, their testimony didn't agree. And rising to the center, the high priest said to him, Aren't you answering anything at all? Look at their testimony against you. But Jesus didn't answer anything at all. Again, the high priest said to him, Are you the anointed one, the Son of the Blessed One? Jesus said, I am. You will all see the human one seated on the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his robes and said, What further need have we for testimony? You yourselves heard the blasphemy. How does it appear to you? They all condemned him to be deserving of death. They began to spit on him and to cover his eyes and strike him and say, Prophesy, and the guards were beating him. Now Peter was in the courtyard by the fire. And one of the servant girls of the high priest saw him and said to him, You were with the Nazarene Jesus too. And Peter said, I don't know or understand what you're talking about. And he went outside the gate of the courtyard, and the rooster crowed. And a little while later, she again saw him and went to him and said to those standing around, This man was one of them. And again, Peter renounced him. And a little later, those standing by said, Come on, you're one of them, you're a Galilean too. And for the third time, Peter said, putting himself under a curse and swearing an oath, I don't know this man you're talking about. Suddenly, the rooster crowed for the second time. And he remembered the saying, how Jesus had said to him, Before the rooster crows twice, you'll renounce me 3 times. And stumbling off, he began sobbing. And early in the morning, the high priests, the elders, and the legal experts assembled. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate said to him, "So, you're the king of the Judeans?" And Jesus said, "You say so." Now the high priests and legal experts were bringing false testimony against him. And so Pilate asked him, "Listen to what they're testifying against you. Don't you have any response at all?" But Jesus no longer said anything at all, with the result that Pilate was amazed. Now at festivals, it was Pilate's custom to release for them one criminal whom they requested. Now the one, Barabbas, was bound in prison with the terrorists who had committed murder in their terrorism. And the crowd came forward and asked for Pilate to do for them as was his custom. Pilate said, "Well then, what do you want me to do with the king of the Judeans?" Because he knew the high priest had handed him over out of envy, but the high priest had stirred up the crowd to ask instead for Barabbas. So Pilate said, "What should I do with him?" And they shouted, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What crime has he committed?" And they shouted even louder, "Crucify him." And Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas to them. And after having Jesus publicly tortured, he handed him over to be crucified. And the soldiers brought him into the inner courtyard, which is called the Praetorium, and they called together the entire cohort. And they put a purple cloak on Jesus, and weaving thorn branches into a crown, they stick it on his head. They were bowing down in homage to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and beating him over the head with a reed staff and spitting on him. When they had finished taunting him, they took the purple cloak off him, put his own clothes back on him, and led him out to be crucified. The soldiers drafted somebody who was coming in from the fields, Simon the Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. And they tried to give him wine drugged with myrrh, but he wouldn't take it. And they crucified him. And they were casting lots to divide up his clothing, who would get what. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him was inscribed, "King of the Judeans." And they crucified 2 terrorists with him, one at his left and the other at his right. And those who were passing by were shaking their head and blaspheming him, saying, "Ha! This is the one who's going to tear down the temple and build it up in 3 days. Well then, come down off the cross and save yourself." And in the same way, the high priests and legal experts were taunting him, saying, "Oh, he saved others. Let him save himself. Let the anointed one, the King of Israel, come down off the cross so that we might see and courageously trust in him." And even those who were crucified with him were taunting him. At 12 o'clock, darkness came over the whole land, and it was dark until 3. And at 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" And one of those standing by said, "Look, he's calling for Elijah." And one got a reed staff, put a sponge on it soaked in cheap wine, and offered it to him, saying, "Leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes and takes him down." And Jesus let out a loud cry curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. And the executioner who stood opposite when he saw how he had died, said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." Now, there were also some women who were watching from a distance. There was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, all who had served with him in Jerusalem and followed him. And there were many other women who'd come up with him from Jerusalem. Now it was the day of preparation. The Sabbath had begun. And so Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was himself also expecting the empire of God, coming and taking courage, asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Pilate was surprised that he had died already, and finding out from the executioner, he granted the corpse to Joseph. And buying a linen cloth, taking him down from the cross and wrapping him in the linen cloth, he laid him in a tomb hewn out of rock. And he rolled the stone in front of the door of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was placed.